I commend this bill to the House.
Mr Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I begin by saying I think we agree on all sides of the House that in response to some of the terrible behaviour that we saw in respect of debt securities, where finance companies pretended to be safe when they weren't, they pretended that they were secure investments when often the debt security that was being offered was a secondary security with the first mortgage security lying ahead of the effective security that investors had when investing in finance companies. There are often earlier debentures and earlier mortgages over the properties that the finance company lending was itself secured over when the finance company lent out the money that the people invested. After those problems, we had to do something. Some of the problems that we had in respect of finance companies were in breach of the existing securities law and were just poor practice under that. We had related party loans that weren't properly disclosed. We had misrepresentations. We had false prospectuses being signed off by directors, and some of that's had criminal and civil consequences for some of the errant directors involved. We had poor audits practice at some times, and some of the statutory supervisors who oversee finance companies under the existing regime didn't cover themselves with glory either. Having said all of that, it was also obvious that we needed to strengthen the law in respect of debt security offerings. We also needed to update the law relating to ordinary capital raisings. There are a couple of issues that have been raised in the committee stage that I should comment on. One is reference to Ross Asset Management. My understanding that the essential problem in respect of Ross Asset Management is still not fixed. I don't think this bill addresses it. This is no criticism of the Minister. But the essential problem with Ross Asset Management is that we had one person who was effectively acting as a manager for lots of different people, and he didn't have any requirement. He didn't have any requirement to have any board structure or other people overseeing his decisions. And he was effectively sitting there as an agent for these people and giving them individual advice. Now, when you have lots of money effectively under management, tens of millions of dollars, he was also a custodian, was he? So he might be called as a custodial trustee, but my understanding is that there's no obligation for someone that's got management of lots of different people's monies, and it could be all of their life saving, to have some sort of decision-making structure that would involve a board. There's no prospectus involved because he's not offering securities to the public. Or whatever the new offer document equivalent is, and there's changes to DIMS regulations that partially affect that. I have been contacted by a member of the financial services sector that's saying that this is still an area that needs further reform because, notwithstanding those changes, the Ross Asset Management debacle could actually occur again and not be prevented by the legislation that we're about to pass. It's no criticism of the government, not even, or the prior people that started this work, which was the Labor Party. You can't think of everything. You can't deal with everything in respect of one in one bill. But I don't think we should pretend that the Ross Asset Management injustice that has been caused is completely fixed by this bill. In respect of getting the balance right between properly protecting unsophisticated investors and debt securities, you have to, on the same time, not be over-regulating ordinary capital raisings. Now, I've heard the response in respect to my question as to what was the position in respect of crowd source funding, and I've been referred to Clause 388 of the bill, which then refers to Clause 6 of Schedule 1 of the bill, saying that through that route there is an ability to exempt some forms of crowdsource funding from some of the requirements of ordinary capital raising. I would say, with respect, that I think we actually will in future have to revisit that, because I think we should. I don't even see why you should have to run that gauntlet in respect of raising small amounts of money from members of the public. That's not much more than some people waste at lotto shops in the weekend. I don't see why people should have to crawl through and obtain exemptions and show that they come within those exemptions, rather than just having a statutory exemption that says, well, crowdsource funding, somehow defined of $100 or $200 per investor, is not caught by these regulations. And that would be a really simple way to carve out that. So maybe we should come back to that. Again, no criticism of the government, because effectively crowdsource funding is just something that's sprung up as a consequence of the internet in the last year or two. I didn't know it existed until about a year ago. A lot of that's in the regs. So the regs might actually be able to do that in a simple way. It would be really good. Thank you, Minister, for that intervention. It might be that the regs can actually have a very simple solution that just completely exempts that sort of capital raising for ordinary capital for small amounts without any regulatory burden. That would be fantastic. Right, the Minister says some. I'm not sure that there's a need for any in respect of that. I certainly don't want them to have issue audits going into the future or having higher director duties than would apply to companies that hadn't raised money from the public. So, as you'll hear from my interventions now and earlier, I have a real concern that in a country of small businesses we don't over-regulate ordinary capital raising, and that includes at all levels of the capital raising. With those comments, Mr Speaker, I do congratulate the Minister and the prior ministers from both sides who have been involved in bringing this to fruition. And I hope that as a consequence New Zealand investors in debt securities can have more confidence that they're not going to lose their life savings if they invest in debt securities, and that we facilitate the prosperous expansion of the New Zealand economy through appropriately but not over-regulated ordinary capital raisings.
Called Jonathan Young.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm very happy to stand and speak at the third reading of the Financial Markets Conduct Bill. It's certainly a significant and very, not only in its size, but its